Welcome to Finance and Manufacturing, the podcast where finance, technology, and manufacturing all come together. I'm Stephen Rosenthal, joined with my co-host, Grant Ludima, and we're happy to help you make sense of the financial side of manufacturing. Without the jargon, just real experiences, best practices, and strategies that you can use in your business. Whether you're a CFO, part of the finance team, or just running operations, this podcast will help you stay ahead of the curve and make smarter financial decisions for your business. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to our very first inaugural episode of Finance and Manufacturing. My name's Stephen Rosenthal. I'm CEO here at DocLib and an entrepreneur. I'm joined by our co-host, Grant Ludima. Is it Ludima or Ludima?
Ludima.
Ludima. All right. I've been saying it wrong, but ERP implementation guru, go-to guy in the NetSuite world, has had a global career, as I found out, living all over the world, spanning multiple roles, and excited to, collaborate together on this podcast in particular. I feel like finance and manufacturing is a little bit of an intimidating thing to start a podcast on for me in my world, just because of, I don't come from a traditional finance background, but I know that you live and breathe this stuff, implementing ERPs. So I'm excited to have you on as a co-host.
Yeah, happy to be here, man. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Cool. So as the title explains, we're really looking to bring high quality content, information to our audience around finance, around manufacturing, around leadership in those areas, and sort of how, as a career person in manufacturing, and focused on the back office, how you can sort of take what's best in breed, implement into your organization, and then hopefully leverage some of the information that we're sharing here to grow in your career and grow in your specific roles. So definitely excited about that. I don't know if anything else related to our purpose, Grant, that you want to touch on, but I think that's pretty much it, right?
We might get into some other areas, but I think we're good for now.
Yeah. I feel like we'll probably get into a little bit about the Midwest. Grant, I'm an East Coast guy. Probably get into a little bit about hunting. I don't know if that's kosher for all of our audience, but
I know.
Or for you, but we might touch on a few different topics. We'll see. But let's start it off. Grant, why don't you tell us a little bit about your current role and maybe bring us up to speed on how you got into your current role, specifically within Crow. I want to get back, getting a little bit back into the backstory as well. What drew you to this world, but maybe start off there.
Yeah, absolutely. I will try to tell it in a way that is short enough but long enough. All the details. But yeah, I essentially fell into this role right out of school. Knew I wanted to do consulting because I didn't quite know what I wanted to do with my career quite yet. And I thought consulting would be a great way to see a window into different industries, different careers, and different roles at different companies, from startups all the way to multi-million dollar, multi-billion dollar companies. So that's what originally drew me to ERP. I had a number of different clients, primarily in the Midwest, all in manufacturing. That's where I fell deeper into all the bombs and all the routes and how do we leverage technology to make the most of our manufacturing processes. And then popped around between Nashville and Chicago, lived there for a while, had a couple clients in Canada. Had the opportunity to work in the Middle East. So lived in Dubai for about a year and a half and was implementing ERP in the broader Middle East. So primarily in the UAE, but also a little bit beyond that. And then came back from that right before the pandemic and have been doing ERP ever since. So the projects have gotten a little bit larger. The teams have gotten a little bit larger. The clients have gotten that much more interesting and fascinating. And it's been a great growth experience ever since.
That's awesome. That's cool. So I know, we came to get to know each other through a shared client and through sort of the NetSuite ecosystem, but were each of those roles that you just kind of touched on, were those all within the NetSuite ecosystem, or were you kind of in a broader ecosystem there?
Yeah, that's a great question. My career started in Microsoft Dynamics. So at the
Oh, okay.
time, it was called Microsoft AX
Mhm.
2009, I think, or 2012.
Okay.
And they had different releases, and it was all on-prem. There was these big releases that you had to make sure your technology was able to go from one release to another with each of your customizations. So it could be very, very disruptive, trying to stay up to date and current and get the most out of your technology. And then when I moved to Dubai, I made the switch over to NetSuite, and I've been doing that ever since. So those have been my primary two systems. But as we're going from one project to another, a lot of our clients are coming off of different systems. Either their business is growing and they need a system that has more features, more functionality, or it's a system that is being sunset and they need to make sure that they can continue to run their business. Or it's just a way that they can stay competitive, right? So there's a couple different reasons that always lead to those transformational decisions. And those are some of the systems that I've worked with too.
Okay. Cool. That's great. And are you do you have any like I know you mentioned you were in manufacturing. It sounds like you may have been into a few different industries there as well, or has it been primarily in manufacturing that you focused?
When I was in the Middle East, it was a little bit more diversified into energy services and things like that. I would say now it's pan manufacturing, but I'll go adjacent to that if it's project based manufacturing or if it's manufacturing that has a software services component or anything like that. But manufacturing's kind of been the hub and spoke of my kind of industry experience and focus.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And I'm still learning a lot, implementing the software that we have and my career so far has been more add-on solutions as opposed to the ERP itself. So, still learning a little bit about how ERP implementations run. But like, what seat do you sit in? And when you look at like the full ERP implementation,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
So as you go through it, right, there's always a number of different hats that the implementation team will wear. Sometimes you're wearing multiple hats if it's a smaller project or smaller team. But now I'm wearing that hat of leadership and oversight.
Mm.
So really being that hand to shake, guiding through that project, playing that role of senior lead or project manager, depending on the nature of the project, and really just trying to guide that client through that experience in a thoughtful, structured way, while also working with my team of rock stars and gorillas through that process to make sure that we're not only changing a client's business from a technology perspective, but we're also bringing insight into how they can really, really get the most value out of the system and improve their business as a result.
Okay. Interesting. Cool. Um, yes, you've got a wealth of knowledge that I will be selfishly picking your brain a lot during this podcast, throughout our episodes, but, cause I feel like there's a lot to learn in that space. I mean, one thing I've always thought about too is, for our clients, it's not their job to implement software, right? Like they're in their role to perform, a specific function within their company or lead a specific department within their company. Um, Whereas for us, it's our job to implement software. And one of the benefits that I think that we have, as well, especially with what you're talking about, is like you walk clients through best practices, and then you roll into the next client who's discovering this stuff for the first time, but you've been there, done that again and again and again and again. So I feel like one thing that I'm would encourage listeners to listen for as well is glean knowledge and information from Grant, for how what those shared clients are experiencing and what they how they've navigated sort of ERP transitions, in general, as well as like best in class usage of their ERP after, having implemented it or maybe looking to refresh or something like that, or just get best in class information out there. I would definitely listen for that and look for that.
Yeah, it's been fun because I used to, at the start of my career, I always thought, I'm flipping switches in the system or I'm helping them add a button that can do X or Y. And then as I got a little bit more seasoned in my career, was okay, how do I get sign off on this portion of the project? How do I make sure we're live on time? And as I've gotten, more and further into my career, it's been about, hey, how do I guide people through this process, right? How do I be the change agent as part of that, right? Because for most of the folks, right, they're using a system that they've been potentially using for 15, 20. I think the record that I had with a client was 30 years. And it can be crazy, right? Like, you've been doing your job this way every single time, and now all of a sudden you're gonna have to be doing your job a little bit differently. I had a client that said, "Can you customize the ERP so it looks like my old ERP?" That was what it was like to me. So
Nice.
it's been fun in that regard, but being a change management mindset was something that I really originally didn't think about. But when you think about it, at the end of the day, right, like, we're in, like, every business is the people business, right? Because it's people that are ultimately what we're working through. So that's been a mindset that I always try to carry forward, is like, I'm literally going to be impacting how someone does their job every single day, and this is my job to do that. But for them, they may be doing this as well as running the business. So that's been fun. And then along with that, best practices, and getting the value out of their system, right? A lot of people think of it as like, get live and then we're done, right? But what you'll find is that keeps you here. And how do I continue to increment on that and grow in the value of what I'm using has been a really big lesson learned in the last really 5 years for me too. The industry itself has been kind of like, get live and then go on. But now we're starting to see with these more evergreen ERP systems, really, it's how do I continue to increase the value out of that has been kind of where the industry shifted. So it's been a fun, growing mindset the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's kind of like similar to utilizing Spotify or on your phone, or Apple Music on your phone. So you don't have a big release, right?
Yeah.
Of like, yeah. So that B2B software often follows that B2C software model, and I see that more and more, where it's an evergreen cloud-based solution that you wake up one morning and you hop into your ERP and something looks a little different. But if you learn how to leverage that, it could be a huge benefit for you. Not usually the case in history with ERPs, but
it's been fun too, because there's been event driven things that have shifted the industry, right? If you go back far enough, it was switching from paper to using an MRP, right, or an ERP to run your business. And then we've added functions and features along the way. And then it was Y2K, right, where a lot of the technology systems, right, you and I are both about the same age, and it didn't impact us as much directly, right? But for that older generation, right, that was a real fear. So everyone got these new Y2K certified systems, and then no one needed a system for a while. And then now, as places went from on-prem to cloud, we saw that in the 2010s. And then in the 2020s, everyone during the pandemic said, I've got people, we're not as busy, right? Or we are just as busy. Let's use this time to implement a new system. So it's been a very ebb and flow nature to the industry as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I was curious, most recently, how you've seen adoption of ERP, specifically with like remote first, around finance and manufacturing. It's very hard to be a remote manufacturer, but for the back office, definitely. So, but that I saw a lot of with our clients, they're just accustomed, like, the culture is to be in the office because that's where the plant is. That's like, it's a physical thing, so having that more remote orientation totally switches up business process, could really have a lot of challenges with it. Have you seen a big difference in how your clients are sort of leveraging ERP, or how they're thinking about their projects now compared to before?
Yeah, absolutely. Pre-2020, right, it was a lot of the old school style ERP projects of, we're going to be on site every week. We're going to be,
you travel a lot though.
Yeah. Still travel a little bit. What we saw was every project was in person, not even a question. It was like talking about travel and expense budgets was just kind of an afterthought of like, oh, this is just something we need to do. In 2020 was, how do we do this remotely? And if you're in accounting, or if you're in the back office or whatever functions like that, the screen you look at with your ERP or whatever the application you're using is the screen that we're showing when we're doing a remote session. So for those groups, it was easy in the sense of when we're prototyping or going through a discovery session and they need to pull something up. It was very easy. But if you're talking about the factory floor or the warehouse, that was a lot harder, right? Because we could not literally take a walk in their shoes, right? We can go to the gemba, so to speak. So that's where we saw a little bit of that difference. And coming out of the pandemic, it seemed to be a little bit bifurcated in that way, where if it's, hey, let's get the operations part of the project team out here to do a factory tour, to do a plant tour, to walk the floor, to map out how we think this is going to go. The accounting sessions, we can do those remotely. That's what we've seen with some of our projects. Some of our projects still like doing that on-site time every week. Some are saying, hey, let's do it maybe 2 weeks a month. Some are saying, let's only do it as we get into a big testing phase or as we go live. And then some are on the very end of the other end of the spectrum saying, let's just do the whole thing remotely. So that's been a big shift because instead of having these really important, meaningful relationships with clients in person, grabbing dinner, grabbing lunch, grabbing breakfast sometimes too, depending on the hour of the day. In some cases, it's been a little bit more indirect. But some of it's still there just as if, it was 2015 all over again.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That was one thing I was curious about, just coming into this. For us, we don't do a whole lot of travel for like the actual implementation of our products.
Mm-hmm.
A lot less intense and complex than implementing an ERP. But I know you jump around a good bit. Is that is the reason for that just being sort of in person on the floor, the manufacturing floor? Like, is it just like company culture of your clients? Like, what do you see as the main drivers for that?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a couple of things. Some of it's certainly company culture, right? Some of our clients that we're working with are in the office 5 days a week. On the other end of the spectrum, right? There's some that are 100% remote. And so that's been a little bit of an interesting thing, is always trying to find success in each of those different types of variables. If it's someone calling me saying like, hey, I have this error message, I can't save this sales order. Very, very easy for me to get on a call, share a screen and go through it. But when all of a sudden they're saying, I've got 50 boxes that haven't shipped and they're not showing up in the system, that's when it's like, okay, I think it'd be more valuable if I'm there in person. There was one client I was working with a number of years ago that was describing this conveyor belt they were using some elaborate metaphor that I was having trouble figuring out, right? I think they called it like this conveyor belt's like a dragon through the warehouse, and I was like, I'm not really following what you're saying. And then there was some connectivity issues too, right? Because they were in the warehouse where Wi-Fi isn't always as strong.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think this is just one of those things I need to see in person. So we flew out there, right? We walked through, and I was like, okay, I don't know if this is like a dragon. It's more of like just a snake, but whatever works. But I think going to the workplace, particularly in a manufacturing floor or in the warehouse, can go a long way, both functionally, but a lot of it's the relationship too, where I always try to bridge the gap of, hey, we're coming in as an expert in your industry, an expert, we understand your requirements, but I also come in with the mind of a student, right? And I want you to feel like I get it. I don't want you to feel like, he's just kind of nodding along. So by having that conversation in person, seeing it in person, taking a walk in their moccasins or shoes, so to speak, can go a long way to not only build that functional understanding of what they need out of the system, but also building that trust, which it's crazy that, when I started out, I thought it was all about the hard skills, but at the end of the day, it's all about relationships, and being there in person can really go a long way in strengthening those.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. Well, I've been peppering you with questions here, and I had you on the hot seat. I told you, this would be a nice, easy, but you've been hitting them out of the park. So good job. But flip the script. Let's get the audience intro to both hosts here, so I don't hog all the air.
No, it's good. You're asking great questions, and I'm always eager to talk more about what I do, just because I love it. So, but I will flip it back on you now. You can continue to work and scale DocLib as a financial tool for your customers in a variety of industries and companies to what it is today. What's it been like in that leadership role, taking that business to where it's at today? I know that's how we met on a project together, but just want to hear more what it's like in your career journey as you talk through that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been unique. So I kind of came up on the medicine. I wanted to be a surgeon. Went to go sell med device. So worked for some of the manufacturers there. Um, Ended up with Stryker and got pretty burnt out selling their trauma line. Consulting in the OR
Yeah.
for big trauma cases, gunshot wounds, motor vehicle accidents, all that. It was also not great for starting a family because you can't really plan those surgeries. So at least people shouldn't be planning those surgeries. Um, but so I was just in the OR all the time, and getting a little burnt out there. So I made the transition over to tech and continued down on the sales and marketing route. Um, didn't really have much on the operations side. And then over time, I'll skip, a long story that maybe we'll touch on one day. But I ended up in a position to buy DocLib, who was a customer of mine at the time. And so I bought that company from my dad and his business partner. Um, and it was interesting, the ecosystem. We're an AP automation tool. It was amazing to me to go to this past suite world and see this be such like a thing. Like I
Yeah.
genuinely expected to go there and not see any AP automation tools.
This is
And
yeah.
it goes to show you how much research I did walking in Suite World. This was like every other booth. But it
Mhm.
was cool. It's been cool to see like the tool DocLab. It was born out of a client like having a real hard time with their AP process and with document management process, and just like whiteboarding it in like the early 2000s. I think it was like 2004 or 2005. They're
Oh,
just whiteboarding it, and then they just decided to kind of build an automated tool to help with that. And then to see where the industry is today is awesome to see. How it's becoming like this is the future. We're already in it as well. Like you should be doing it. So that's been cool. It's been fun to ride that wave. But to your point, I think the most important component for me has been building it with the people in our company. Um, we have our a great leadership team. Two of the individuals have kind of jumped from company to company that either I've started or been a part of, and just been like my right hand people, which has been awesome. One of them, was a hotel clerk in 2020 and got furloughed and helped with my email a few hours a week, starting out, and then grew. Now she's running our customer success department in the software company, but she built the marketing company that we had and sold. She was our operations manager. Just kind of like really watching people progress in their career and providing a context for that to happen at the helm of DocLab has just been really awesome. That's been the really fun part of it. And then you see that is parlayed directly into how customers are taken care of and how well our software performs for them, because people care, and they want to come alongside the customer there. So yeah, that's been the most enjoyable part. I forget exactly what your question was, but hope
no,
answered it.
it's good. I'm just it's fun hearing about your journey. I mean, how did your experience working for Stryker kind of shape your mindset as you made that pivot into technology? Was that kind of that customer mindset first, or was that thinking about how technology changes the experience for who you're working with? Like, how do you think that some of your experiences shaped your mindset to what it is today?
Yeah, I definitely think what you hit on it there with having a customer first mentality. So my it was interesting. So in my role, I would sell to the hospital at Stryker. I would sell to the hospital and sort of do a larger contract, and then but the work had just begun then. Now it's having the surgeons educated and understanding how to use the tools that we sold to the hospital, and then assisting with like the very tactical, like how do we put this screw into this fractured femur. you know
Wow.
um, so all the way down, from like very high level, kind of getting that initial contract done, all the way through to helping determine how to handle this particular fracture with a surgeon. So there's a few different customers along that path, from both the hospital and from like the surgical staff. But the big thing that it showed to me is responsiveness and like really orienting yourself around what the customer cares about. And those situations, a lot of them were life or death. So it was like very like motivating, right? To be customer minded.
Yeah,
Because I'm like, I'm playing a part in this surgeon saving this person's life.
yeah,
So there's no really a lot of room for you to be thinking about yourself in that, you know? Um, so like that kind of forces the customer mentality into your brain. And the end user of my products are literally like, the everyday person. So that was cool. And it also, for the surgeons, you're like kind of a part of their team, and like you're meant to be the expert in your domain. So obviously, like I could not go in there and, um, you know, fix this femur fracture, or put together this person's limb who, was hanging out of the door when the car flipped, like I can't do that. But there's parts of that process that I'm supposed to be the expert in that the surgeon's not. So like when I'm in the OR at that time, they would be like, what do you think about putting this plate here? Or like, should we move the femur this way to get the screws to get a little bit more purchase in the bone on the opposite side? Like there's all this like kind of back and forth collaboration with the customer. And it really showed me that like, you know, they're best in class people with like their particular job, but they lean on what they have behind them. So that could be technology in the form of plate and screw that they're using to fix a femur, or it could be technology in the form of an ERP and financial tool. You're really leaning on sort of the expertise, the best in class things behind you to get your job done. So yeah.
wow. I like the idea that OR is a team, right? I always think
Yeah.
of the doctor being, just the guy, right, or the gal, right, and having the whole team of support behind it makes a lot of sense. Do you still keep a pair of scrubs, or
Yeah.
those are long gone?
Yeah. My wife is a nurse as well, so she's got the medical training. It's funny, I just pretend to have some training. So,
Perfect. What
yeah, but it's cool to watch. Some of those surgeons operate. They're like it's like sitting courtside. To
Yeah,
an
ooh,
NBA. Yeah, just like just incredible.
experts in action. What
Yeah.
what was that shift like as you made that switch from being in medical device sales to starting one business, starting multiple businesses? Like, what was that sense of entrepreneurship always there and it was just kind of dormant, or was that something you found in yourself as you progressed through your careers?
Yeah, I never really put a pin on or like exactly put my finger on what I was doing previously, but like even in college, needed some money, went and door knocked and got some landscaping jobs. It was or coming out of school, selling things, flipping stuff. All kinds of like whenever I had the need to buy something, my idea was more so to go get a customer as opposed to a job. Like that was just kind of naturally how I think. So like that when got into med device, that's really where I learned sales and learned deal making and what it's like to put together a deal that's going to really help the customer achieve what they're trying to achieve with whatever products or services that I have to offer. Um, and that's really where it all kind of came to fruition. I was like, I just love business. I love putting together high quality products and services to meet the needs that I'm seeing with my customers. So then that's just kind of parlayed into a bunch of different stuff. So that was true for Stryker, but I got a taste of corporate life and hated it. So um, that's why it sort of fled that situation. But whether it's marketing, whether it's bounce houses, whether it's rental real estate, whether it's technology, financial technology, it's all the same thing in my mind where there's needs that the market is displaying through customers, and you're putting together products or services and putting together a good deal that's going to really help that customer win with what you have, and then using that insight from that customer to better your products and services. So like for DocLib, I try to consolidate what we're hearing from customers and from prospects to really guide our roadmap, and then have that test and tried and approved by our customer base. So I really feel like that's kind of, I think, why I'm geared towards entrepreneurship. But I also kind of like playing my own game as opposed to, you know, Striker's game or, the corporation's game. So on my terms. So that's sort of why,
Is it is it a little bit addictive being kind of a serial entrepreneur? I feel like for most people, they always have that idea of like what would it be like, but they can never quite cross that threshold of putting it to action. But you've done that multiple times. Does that feeling of starting something just get a little bit addictive, or what advice would you have
Yeah.
for someone who's thinking about being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, so the advice I'd have in thinking about entrepreneurship, and I mean, there's two pieces to this. I think that there are great companies that can foster those sorts of mentalities within the company. So I would encourage, I think, people, and I would assume that most of our listenership for this particular podcast would be people that may or may not really be interested in starting their own business, but as it stands today, they're really within a manufacturing company, sort of operating within that company. So my advice, I think, would be to look at how are you pushing the company forward with your particular domain. Like, how are you thinking outside the box? So, like a lot of our people that we work with within finance, they're heads down. They're kind of in their spreadsheets. They're in their tools. They're not really looking up and looking around to see, is there anything that we could be doing better? Are there things that are just that we're going to hit that are going to be a problem for us if we don't address something now? But then you look at the VPs of finance or the CFOs, and that's all they do. They're just looking around like, what's going to cause us some issues? How are we going to be able to navigate that? So I think that's an entrepreneurial mindset to kind of lift your head out of the urgent, the tyranny of the urgent. Lift your head out of that and kind of survey, where are we going, and how are we going to handle what we're seeing here. So I think that's a big one, and a lot of my advice, if someone's looking to move out into an entrepreneurial journey, I think everyone's risk meter is very different, and a lot of the moves I've made seem risky, and probably even more so to myself, hindsight. But I feel like getting an understanding of how you interpret risk is a big one, and ensuring that you are true to that, so you don't put yourself in a compromised situation. And then, yeah, I'm 100% addicted to starting stuff. Like, it's just, I can't help it. I think we got like 15 LLCs now. It's just a problem. It's
Wow.
ridiculous.
It's funny because, yeah, like the way that you talk about it, right? That entrepreneur's mindset is the same as the innovator's mindset, is the same as the curious mindset, right? So even if you're not starting a business, if you're an executive trying to just make business better, it's having that curiosity to say, like, what else could we be doing? How else can we continue to grow? How else can we continue to thrive? That I think can go a really, really long way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you probably have experienced this with customers that are curious. It can be double-sided. If they're a little tech-centric and tech-savvy, it's a little bit helpful when they're curious. If they're not, it could be like, you really don't need to know that, I'm sure, the curiosity really benefits your projects that you're on too, I'm sure. Do
Yeah,
you have any
absolutely.
examples of that or thoughts around that?
I always think of it in terms of personas of who I'm working with, and the
Mhm.
industries that they're in, right? So if they're a startup, right, they have all these great ideas, right? They're a 3-person business and they're talking about, hey, how do we leverage all of this when we're a $500 million business? So that's always really fun to think about there. But the other way that I think about it too is, when I'm meeting with an executive team, right? I'm trying to have different conversations with different people, right? So if it's the CFO, it's typically dollar cents and deadlines, right? If
If,
it's
if
the
it,
COO, it's that how do we do this and what's the impact? If it's the CEO, it's what's the story? And then of course, if it's the CIO that I'm talking to, they want to know, how is this going to work? How do I troubleshoot it? If this stops working or I get an error message, what do I do next? So it's always been fun to think through each of those different lenses. And then the nature of the organization itself, right? Some organizations view outsiders, right, as partners. Others view it in that customer or vendor relationship, right? And it's interesting to see how that translates to, some of those conversations we have to have as the project goes through. And then also, as we're going into each session we have to go through, some are, hey, it's fit for standard, it fits my use case, that's good. But then other folks will, what does every single button and every single page do in the system that we're working with, and how did it set up? How do I change it? Oh, I can't change it because I'm an end user, I'm not an administrator. How do I do it if I want to do it? So it's always fun for me to see the different personalities and the different cultures of some of the organizations we've worked with, and then how that flows through to how the project is executed.
Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome. So one of the things that I liked that we had on our list of questions it was sort of where's manufacturing going? Where do you see things evolving over the next few years and potentially even next decade? I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, kind of being in the weeds with manufacturers day in and day out. Where do you see things going? What kind of big things do you see that on the horizon?
Yeah, I think there's a whole range of things, from like the really attractive breaking technology. How do we incorporate AI or 3D printing? It was 3D printing a couple of years ago. How do we incorporate those things into our business? And then on the very other end of the spectrum is like, hey, I'm making biscuits at a bakery. Like, how do I do this better? And so what I think is really interesting is, across the entire industry, there's different technologies that manufacturers can work through or distributors can work through. But then there's also just the realities of like, how does this apply to me, and what's my use case? So I think, like, if I'm an executive at a manufacturing company, it really comes down to like, how does each of these new technologies and what's going on geopolitically throughout the world, and what's going on, I was obviously the pestle, political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental, right? How does that apply to my business, and how do I incorporate that in real time, right? So what it turns into, right, geopolitically is, right, people are trying to have things be closer to have a more resilient supply chain that might be a little less efficient, right? Economically, right, interest rates at all-time highs, so working capital or not all-time highs, sorry, higher than they were in the 20s and
a lot higher.
A lot higher, right? So working capital becomes a lot more important. So instead of talking about, hey, how do we make sure this project's going through, it's, hey, how's this project going to impact my inventory, the amount of inventory that I have, or my DSOs, right? All the way through to technology, where it's, hey, I don't really care about this part of the process. How does it drive towards this output, and the jobs to be done there? And, a lot of people try to leverage different parts of new technology as buzzwords. So I always try to zoom out and think about, okay, what's the use case here? If I'm a customer service rep and I have 60 customer service reps or something like that taking orders all day, is there a way that we can augment that with technology to make it everyone's able to go home and see their families sooner, right? Hey, we're seeing trends in our quality department where this happens frequently under these conditions. Okay, let's talk about preventative maintenance. Or, hey, my system's running fine. I'm getting orders out the door, but how do I get insight to drive my business, right? A lot of the times people think of analytics and insight as an afterthought. Hey, it's all about operational efficiency. But the thing that I always zoom out and think about is, it doesn't really matter if you're doing something really efficient if you're doing the wrong thing, right? If you're digging a hole and you need to be building a tower, it doesn't matter how deep or how well that hole is built. And that's where a lot of people neglect analytics. And I think that's where it comes back to as well, is, do I have the insight to drive my business not only in a direction, but in the right direction? Those are some of the things that I've seen in the last couple of years, but I'd be curious for your perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's very Bezos-esque of you to talk about use case, because that was like a big thing for him in bringing new technology into Amazon. He was like, if you cannot explain a new technology with a customer use case, then throw it away. Like, we're not even touching it. So that was
Otherwise, it's
very
abstract, right?
Yeah,
it's so abstract. I mean, it was
Grant Ludima ready for the next CEO of Amazon. I love it.
Yeah, I always think of it as like, it was blockchain in the 2010s, right? I'm embarrassed to say, I'll be honest, I still can't think of the use case for blockchain. I know it led to a lot of great technologies, but that's what I love about AI is like I can directly point to a use case. But have you seen that on your side as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've been doing a deep dive into AI recently. And I mean, we have some in our tool, specifically around reading unstructured documents and pulling the appropriate information off those unstructured documents to like feed the workflow engine something that's readable as opposed to just like a PDF. I can feed some actual information from that PDF. So we utilize some AI around that part of our tool, and it's been amazing just watching that uh, increase in its accuracy like tenfold over the past 2 years. Like that's been pretty wild. But then they also just personally doing deep dives into AI. Um, I do like at first I was kind of in the same vein, thinking a lot about how, oh, I wonder if this is just like another buzzy thing, like, oh, the blockchain sounds so great, and then you start to think about, well, okay, like how are you actually going to use this? And yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm not exactly sure, how we would use this. Um, but yeah, with AI playing around with it, I do genuinely believe it will be a total and complete game changer for people's roles. And I think that it's super, super important to like cut through some of the buzzy noise for people, especially in finance, and like really get an understanding of what sort of innovations are being made in this area. Because I think they're substantial. Like, and it may not be, the end all be all job killer that some people may make it out to be. Um, it could be, and you should probably have a plan around that. Um, but it also like I've already felt it. Like in the areas that I leverage AI in my work, I am incredibly more efficient, just like unbelievably more efficient. So even if you're able to use it in that sense, it's a huge benefit. Like, why not do something like that? But yeah, I think when I look out over the future within manufacturing, I definitely see a lot of it is like adopting AI in the right way.
Yeah.
You know,
I've always thought of it through two lenses in particular with AI. I've always thought about it as, in the 1900s or whatever year it was when Henry Ford started making the Model T, right? There was a lot of people working in stables and making horseshoes that probably thought they were going to be out of a job too, right? But they became gas station attendants and mechanics, right? In the same way that you talked about it, right? It has increased your output significantly. It doesn't mean you're working less. It means you're doing more. And I think that's a really important consideration too, as we think about each of those individual use cases on a personal level, but also across businesses, right? It's not about necessarily, having fewer people or anything like that. It's about doing more at higher quality that can allow us to really optimize our business too.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Cool. Well, I mean, I'm excited. I know we've got a lot of other potentially good topics. I'm even just thinking about double clicking into a few that we touched on here today into the rest of this podcast. I know we're planning on bringing on various guests as well that are in your shoes as a listener of the show, and hearing from them. And I'm definitely looking forward to that. Any final thoughts on our first episode for you, Grant? Anything?
Looking forward to getting started more, and always the student, always the teacher. So look forward to working more and talking more together and getting to know some really great guests on the show.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you all for listening, for taking our first step. And if you're listening to this, I appreciate that tremendously. 45 minutes. Well, my after post-production might not be exactly 45 minutes, but appreciate you hanging on and listening to our first episode. If you want to hear more conversations from the Finance and Manufacturing podcast, make sure that you subscribe so that you never miss an episode. If you think someone in your network would benefit from these conversations, we'd love for you to share it with them. Thank you for listening again. Focus on what you do best and automate the rest. We'll see you next time.